In 2009, the Leadership Institute has already trained 537 students in 22 of our 44 types of schools. And since 1979, LI has trained more than 70,700 people, most of them students. You have before you at the table our currently scheduled schools for 2009. That list grows constantly because most of our schools are this year are yet to be scheduled. We add to the program all the time. I ask you to take a moment to review that schedule and consider attending one or more of those schools or sending a friend to one of our programs. Now my pleasure to introduce to you Andrea McCarthy, who will offer an invocation and lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance. Andrea is the Director of Recruitment here at the Leadership Institute. She attended Cedarville University in Ohio, where she was active in College Republicans and the National Political Science Honor Society Pi Sigma Alpha. She holds bachelor's degrees in political science and history. Would you step up here, please, Andrea McCarthy.
Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning with a grateful heart, thankful for the beautiful day that you've blessed us with. We thank you for the opportunity to gather together and hear what our speakers prepared for us, and we thank you for his willingness to do so. We thank you for the food provided. We pray that you will bless it to our bodies and use it to sustain us throughout the day. We pray all of this in your Son's precious name. Stand for the pledge.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Oh, and one thing I didn't say at the outset, isn't this global warming terrible? Now, I present to you Dan Whitfield. He's going to give us a report on the Institute's programs. He is a recruitment coordinator at the Leadership Institute. He represents the Institute at national conferences and meetings and seminars, of which, thank goodness, there are a lot of conservative conferences, meetings, and seminars going on. Reed Larson here, whom we're honored to have, can well remember the times when there were at most one or two conservative events in the course of an entire calendar year that conservatives felt it important to attend. Before moving to D.C., Dan was a teaching assistant at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where he specialized in 19th century foreign policy of the United States in East Asia. You talk about a specialization. Dan has had his writings published in Projecting Politics, an educational foundation in England, and the Center for Policy Studies. He is originally from the United Kingdom and a graduate of the University of Nottingham, where he was active in student politics. Dan?
Thank you very much, Morton. Good morning, everybody. And it is a good morning because I am pleased to announce that despite what you may have heard from our friends in the media, reports of the death of conservatism are greatly exaggerated. Last week, the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, known as CPAC, was held in Washington, D.C. and drew a record crowd of 8,500 people. Now, given that the venue of this conference could only hold legally 7,000 people, I'd appreciate if you didn't tell that to the local fire marshal. And thanks to our kind donors and friends, the Leadership Institute at CPAC trained a record number of conservative activists. LI offered 5 trainings during the 3-day conference in addition to a job fair. And all of these events were exceptionally well attended. Over 100 people were trained in public speaking, learning how to condense their conservative philosophy into easily understood and communicated sound bites. 120 people attended our Internet Activist Workshop, where expert faculty were on hand to help conservatives understand how to use new media to spread their message. In total, the Leadership Institute trained 453 people compared to 250 people in 2008. 752 people attended our job fair, again in comparison to 495 people in 2008. This does not sound like a movement that is close to death. And CPAC is only the start of what promises to be a very important year for the Leadership Institute and our many students. Thanks to the support provided by our donors, LI is already preparing for our campus field program. This fall, we will send out representatives across the country to help create independent conservative groups on campus. The right is ready to learn from what our friends in the liberal movement have accomplished, and LI is ready and stands ready to help. So in conclusion, with our building expansion underway and our national and international trainings very well attended by eager students, my message is we have nothing to fear from the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Great report. And now, to introduce our speaker. It is our custom when introducing our speakers to see if we can find somebody who is on staff who has some relationship with our speakers, and that is almost always the case. And here we have quite a relationship between our speaker and the person who will introduce him. Elizabeth Stafford has been with the Leadership Institute since June of '06, working as the Director of Donor Communications in the Development Department. And I can't tell you how essential this position is and what a great job Elizabeth is doing. She graduated from Grove City College. And by the way, we had 42 people from Grove City College staying in our dormitories during CPAC. She got her degree at Grove City in Communication Studies and Political Science. And she is married to Doug Stafford, Vice President of the National Right to Work Committee. And they reside in Fairfax, Virginia, with their 3 daughters. And so that's quite a good relationship because she's married to Doug Stafford, and she's introducing Doug Stafford's boss. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Morton. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Committee and National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. The committee is a 2.2 million member grassroots lobbying organization which has been fighting forced unionism for over 50 years. The committee has led the fight on every major fight against big labor during this time and is at the forefront of the current card check battle, which I'm sure Mark is going to tell you more about in a minute. In addition to his work with the committee, under his leadership, the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation has continued to provide unparalleled free legal assistance to workers and has utilized cutting-edge legal strategies to protect workers from the abuses of compulsory unionism. Mark is a frequent guest on national television shows such as Fox News Channel's Your World with Neil Cavuto and Fox and Friends, as well as CNBC's Power Lunch. Mark is also a sought-after speaker on political technology and grassroots lobbying tactics. He often travels across the country speaking and training participants in the political process. Of course, he is also a Leadership Institute graduate, having completed the Capitol Hill Staff Training School and the YLS over 20 years ago. He is now a faculty member and a regular speaker to our interns. Finally, and certainly most importantly, Mark has been married for over 15 years to his wife Diana and is a dedicated father to 6 children, 5 girls and 1 boy, ranging in ages from 2 to 14. Please welcome us in welcoming Mark Mix to the Wednesday Wake Up Club Breakfast.
Well, the only thing that Morton said, he doesn't say anything that's not true, but he did say that I'm Doug Stafford's boss. I would say that Doug Stafford is my boss, and Doug knows that. Doug is one of the guys that makes the Right to Work movement go, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank him for his dedicated effort, and that of his wife in helping make the Right to Work issue and the Leadership Institute successful, because Doug certainly does that. But also, I would be remiss if I did not honor and thank another individual here who's in whose shadow I try to walk and whose shoes I cannot fill, but that would be Reed Larson. Reed Larson, the former president of the National Right to Work Committee for, I don't know, I want to say 45 years or something like that, but I might be a little short on that. Reed has been involved in the Right to Work movement for many, many years and has been a mentor and a friend and a man of great wisdom and integrity and a great model for a young man growing up in a movement in a town where he never thought he would be. So Reed, thank you, and on behalf of all of us, I would like to honor you with a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here. Well, as Morton said, these are interesting times, and I think I can say they are the worst of times, but yet perhaps they are the best of times for our movement and for our cause. Ladies and gentlemen, individual freedom is under attack as never before in America's workplace. It is interesting that we have here an individual who I've met with recently who happens to be a political candidate and running in the 46th district of for the House of Delegates. When I first met her, her business card included the letters AFL-CIO. And for any of you who follow our issue, you know that the AFL-CIO stands for the American Federation of Labor and the Congress Industrial Organizations. And you know, for the AFL-CIO, guys like Reed Larson and Doug Stafford and Mark Mix aren't really allegedly that friendly. In fact, we're the enemy of the worker. And if you go on the internet and you Google Reed Larson or Mark Mix, you often hear the Darth Vader breathing, and you hear the muted voice of this evil cabal and conspiracy, and they have the organizational chart that Morton talks so much about from time to time with the center box and the lines running all over the place to foundations and other organizations, and some of it's true, but indeed the Right to Work movement has become the enemy, public enemy number one for the AFL-CIO. Now, why is it we're public enemy number one? Why is it? It's because here's what we believe. We believe that every worker ought to have the right to join a union, but no worker should be forced or compelled to pay fees to a union to get or keep a job. For that, we're union enemy number one. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that the people at Right to Work and the Right to Work principle, as it is developed over the course of almost 70 years now, is a better product for American workers than what the AFL-CIO and the Change to Win and the Teamsters offer American workers, and that is compulsion. Because their power is based on compulsion, compulsion generated and developed in 1935 under a president who had his own New Deal. He had a United States New Deal. I guess now we have an international New Deal from what we're hearing from our new president. But I'm very, very concerned about the expansion of forced unionism under the current political regime. And I think all of us ought to be concerned about it. As I tell the interns when I speak to them, I have the privilege, Morton gives me the privilege to speak to the interns I think once every 3 or 4 months, and it really is a fun time for me and an honor for me. In fact, I think Dan probably ought to be up here speaking instead of me today. I enjoyed listening to Dan. I think congratulations, Dan. But we talk about Right to Work, and many of the interns sitting there having dinner aren't really familiar with the issue because it's not a marquee issue. It's not one of those ones on the movie screen, flashing lights that says, you know, you ought to be concerned about this. We have other issues, taxes and pro-life and the right to keep and bear arms, which are important rights. But ladies and gentlemen, the right to labor freely is a right that we ought not to lose sight of because we are losing sight and we're losing the ability to practice that. And this president, who in his autobiography indicates that he feels he owes an obligation to these unions, when they call, he hurries to pick up the phone to return the call, and he doesn't find that corrupting in any way. But let me tell you what they're asking this president to do quote, on behalf of America's workers. Probably the highest priority on their list is to take away the right to a secret ballot election for union certification. For those of you who have not studied labor law, it's really not that complicated. Basically what they're telling you is that if I can get, four of us can get to Morton and twist his arm and put a little 3x5 piece of paper in front of him and say, Morton, sign this, and he says, no, I don't want to sign it. And then we get another guy to stand up and say, Morton, sign this. And then we get Luke. Where's Luke over there? Luke's back there. He's somewhere. We have Luke, my Texan guy there. I had a big guy, an intern, that was helping me last time I was beating people up. But anyway, when we convince Morton to sign that card, he has now signed a card that when we get 50% plus one of you in the room to sign that card, we'll all be in the union. This side of the room may not have ever known that this was going on over here, but guess what? If we can get these people to sign the cards, you will now be bound to be represented by a union you never asked for, never voted for, or never wanted. And the AFL-CIO would have you believe that's good for you. Well, you may believe that. If you don't, too bad. This bill is the #1 litmus test for organized labor in this Congress, and the Vice President of the United States and the Secretary of Labor are in Florida. I guess they were there yesterday. I assume they're back in Washington today. But they were down there meeting with the bosses of big labor to execute a strategy and a plan to impose this type of legislation on America's workers. Well, I can tell you that they'll have to run over a few bodies to get this done, and I think we'll fight them and we'll beat them ultimately in the United States Senate. But imagine an organization that claims to want to represent people taking away your right to vote whether or not you want to be part of a private organization. It's outrageous. But yet, 5 years ago, when Stuart Acuff, who was the organizing director of the AFL, talked about this bill in the inner sanctums of Washington, they said people laughed at him. This bill wouldn't pass the laugh test. But yet here we are, ladies and gentlemen, on the precipice of a violation of basic individual freedoms as it relates to your ability to labor. Well, this bill also contains some other interesting provisions that I think are an anathema to the American ideal and the American experiment. If after we get this side of the room organized because this side of the room signed cards, we'll begin a negotiation process over the terms and conditions of your employment. And we'll get 90 days to negotiate those terms and conditions. And of course, one of those terms and conditions will be that everybody pay dues and fees to the union and have that money extracted from their paycheck automatically, or you won't be able to keep your job. Well, if after 90 days we don't agree to those terms, a federal mediator will fly in and say, the great lie, I'm here from Washington and I want to help. And he will fly in, and for 30 days he will try to put the two parties together. And if he doesn't, ladies and gentlemen, then the United States federal government will impose a contract on you and you that will be in effect for 2 years that can be unchanged. So it has it doesn't have any bearing on whether or not the company can support this or whether you agree with it. The federal government will impose terms and conditions of employment as a matter of their power under this bill. Outrageous, as you think. How can this happen? Well, here we are. The other thing is that they want to dramatically increase the penalties on employers for the idea that they've created unfair labor practice charges. They want to break small employers in America using this compulsory unionism power. And this is just the beginning of what this president's promised organized labor. We also have a bill that we'll be fighting that probably will become law with his signature, is a federal mandate that all police, firefighters, and EMTs across the country concede to be part of a union and basically require the states to recognize unions as bargaining agents for all police, firefighters, and EMTs across the country. This is step one, we believe, in an overall overarching federal program to control all government employees across the nation. I don't think it's too much to say that's what's in the plan here for the American Federation of State Government or State, County, and Municipal Employees Unions and the AFL-CIO. They want the federal government to control everything, and especially at the government level. That bill, unfortunately, probably will become law sometime this year. I hate to say that. But other things that they're interested in that are destructive of the fabric of this country as it relates to our ability to labor and the control that they want to mandate and impose over individual workers. In a country founded on the great idea of individual freedom, how is it that we can support a policy that allows a private organization and private individuals to force you to support them? Well, I think it's wrong. We know it's wrong. The American people know it's wrong. 8 out of 10 Americans believe it's wrong to force a worker to pay dues or fees to a union as a condition of getting or keeping a job. So, we have public opinion on our side. Why can't we win? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the mission of the Leadership Institute, and why, I hate to say how many years ago, the years are adding up, that I attended a legislative project management school at the Lyon Community Center. Is that right? Was that the name of that? Lyon Village Community Center. I'm sorry. That's over right near Morton's house, by the way, I think. Is it still there? It's still there. And we sat there for 3 or 4 days, and we learned that the technology that the other side uses and the technology that we use is neutral. That if I can pick up the fork, I can use the fork to feed myself. But so can the other side. And so in political battles against organized labor, we owe it to ourselves to learn how to win. And I did that right here at the Leadership Institute. And of course, under the guidance of a man who had been in, 3, 4, 5, 600 legislative battles in his time, Reed Larson. So I've been to more Leadership Institute schools than Elizabeth mentioned. I think I've been to the public speaking school, which I didn't learn much from. I've been to the television studio school, which convinced me that I was a radio guy. I have been to the direct mail writing school. I've been to the campaign management school. I've been to the leadership training, YLS training school. I've been to the legislative project management school, 10 times. We've been to it so many times that we had to create our own school, and we did. But it is a privilege to be in front of you as a young man from that was picked out of a school in the Shenandoah Valley by an organization with the help of the Leadership Institute, and now in a position to help fight for and labor for America's working men and women. I also said that this can be the best of times, and I do believe that. As Dan said, the attendance at CPAC, and I'm a little worried that the people looking for jobs was up by double. That's not a good thing. Conservatives may be motivated, but they're out of work apparently. We need to fix that. But the bottom line is, it is an exciting time, and as Thomas Paine said in American Crisis, that the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot have left the field. But it'd be the worst imaginable mistake if we didn't take advantage of the time that we have now to rebuild, to reorganize, and to reestablish those basic freedoms that made this country strong and great. We are getting the antithesis of that from our leadership. As Morton mentioned, more taxes, taxes on this, taxes on that, more government growth, more deficits. They literally are destroying the very underpinnings of our nation. And I believe, as I travel the country, ladies and gentlemen, that in small corners of counties and in small towns, and as Morton said, he's been on the road for the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, traveling around the country, there is a strength, there is a fabric, and there is a basic understanding of the founding principles of the country. You may not see it, and CNN doesn't want to show it to you, and ABC doesn't want to show it to you, and NBC doesn't want to show it to you, but it's there. And the good news for an organization like the National Right to Work Committee is we do our best when we're under attack. I mean, we need to learn to be better on offense, but on defense, we're pretty darn good. And defense means that you're responding and you're reacting, which is not the position you want to be in organizationally and politically all the time. But I will tell you, it helps to solidify and mobilize constituencies that heretofore were thinking that, there really isn't a threat. For the last 8 years, we've been lulled to sleep by a president and by an administration that's done us no good, other than the fact that they're there to block the most egregious infringements on our freedom. And frankly, in hindsight, I don't know if we can even say that. This president of the United States signed a bill called McCain-Feingold that he admitted publicly that he thought was unconstitutional. How could he do that? Why would he do that? Why would he allow the violation of our First Amendment, our most basic speech rights, right there in the very First Amendment to the Constitution? He knew it was unconstitutional, but he signed it anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not leadership. It is a time for new leadership. It is a time for principled leadership. It is a time not to run from our principles of freedom and individual liberty. It is a time to run to them. It is a time to run to them with the speed and the energy that we can muster, all the speed and the energy we can muster. Because if we don't, I believe that the last vestiges of what we understand as American freedom is slowly disappearing. And frankly, disappearing more quickly than slowly, I'm afraid. As a father and a husband, I first need to take care of my home, and I try to do that. I try to take care of my daughters and my son, and I try to be a good father. But part of that is a commitment to providing for their future. And as I look ahead, just maybe 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and certainly 25 years, if we stay on this same track, allowing compulsion in the workplace, taking away individual freedom to vote on basic exercises of rights, if we can condone that, then I shudder to think what my daughters and what my son will face just a few short years ahead of time. I don't consider myself done in this business at all. Matter of fact, I consider our best days and my best days ahead of me. Little do you know, I'm only 28 years old, so there's a lot of time ahead of me. But I will tell you that I am committed to fight, and we must fight. And I think the Leadership Institute and your presence here today is by providential decree. We're here for a reason. And if I can offer you any extra encouragement, if I can spark any extra desire or any extra effort in your lives to get out and fight for what you and I believe in, and I believe we believe in the same things, I would encourage you to do so. It's a privilege to be here at Leadership Institute. It always is to come back. It's kind of like alumni weekend for me as a graduate and as a faculty member. It's really exciting and extremely humbling to be here at this podium with Morton and Reed and others in this room who we've interacted with. I thank you for the opportunity. I encourage you to continue to fight, and I encourage you to continue to learn how to win. And with that, I'll take some questions. Thank you, Morton. Yes, sir.
If you raise your hand and wait until you get a microphone.
Test, test. Yeah, in the Congress we have about 50 blue dog Democrats. I would make a fairly easy assumption that most of them should be on our side, your side on this particular issue. How strong would that be? Because the 50 plus the Republicans would equal about what you need to block it, right?
Yes, sir. Those blue dog Democrats are becoming bluer and bluer by the minute as they watch this new administration try to do the things they're doing. I will tell you, in the last Congress, most of them voted for this bill. Of course, they voted for the bill, as most politicians will, when there was no chance of it passing and it was an easy thing to do. It was an easy vote to cast. But you are correct in saying that right now, those same so-called blue dog Democrats, who, by the way, vote for Nancy Pelosi for leader or for speaker, which is a problem, but those blue dog Democrats are now telling the AFL-CIO that they want to slow down a bit on this bill. They want the Senate to take the first step because they don't want to have to vote for this political stinker, knowing that it could affect their re-elections. And many of them are from right-to-work states where you have the ability to choose whether or not to pay dues or fees to a union as a condition. You don't lose your job if you don't. And so they know that that's a politically popular issue, and they're loath to vote for a bill that would take away these rights. And so I think you're right. I would say this. I don't believe we can stop the bill in the House. And in fact, the right-to-work organizations across the country, both here and in the state groups, are, I don't want to say we're not mobilizing. We're going to let our membership know where these people stand, but the battle is in the Senate. The battle is over 1 or 2 votes in the United States Senate. And we have got to just blow out our grassroots communication and our mobilization models on every single U.S. senator, except for maybe Ted Kennedy or Barbara Boxer or Dianne Feinstein, those. But every other senator ought to hear from their constituents and ought to hear from us. But I think those blue dog Democrats are now rethinking the positions they've taken in the past because now they know these things can become law.
Hello. I'd like to focus on that a remark you made peripherally. You talked about the attack on small business. Do you have a sense that large business, I'm thinking GE and its subsidiary NBC and so forth, pretty much in the Obama camp or the Democrat camp? I'm thinking of positions that the National Chamber of Commerce has taken and so forth. And then the other data point is that small business in the United States creates the great bulk of new jobs.
Yeah, that's a great point. GE's not as big as they used to be. I think their market cap was down about I don't know. There's what, $6 a stock, $6 a share now. So they're not as big as they used to be. But your point is extremely well taken. The largest members of the largest trade associations that represent business in America, I think sometimes in the dark night they think boy, if we could just get other businesses to share our pain, and it would create barriers to entry from competitors, those type of basic economic principles that we all understand. But I think you're onto something. I think if GM and Chrysler and Ford would advise the U.S. Senate as to what to do on card check, they'd say, let's allow card check because we want the other automakers to have the same problems that we have. And the big businesses, we want those other businesses to have the same problems that we have. Now, on a scale of the big business, that probably makes a difference. It may not make much difference, excuse me, but when it comes down to the small business, which you correctly identify as the engine of economic vitality in the country, these guys are the ones that are being left out to dry. I mean, this card check legislation is designed for that company that has 10 to 50 employees. You know, they're just big enough that they've got some issues in management, and they're small enough that it doesn't take a whole lot of time, talent, and treasure to organize them. And the idea of getting cards from a 50-member unit, you get 25 people or 26 people to sign the card, and the union's in just like that. It's push-button unionism, and I think it's designed more or less to destroy that very small business you're talking about. And if I was a small businessman in America today, I would be up in arms, and I would be energized, and I would be mobilized on this issue of card check, because I think the unions look at it and they say, you know, we don't really have a whole lot of effort and chance right now with those small business people because we got to win elections, and when the small business person talks to his employees, generally they believe him. But with cards, there's no communication at all. You get the cards, you got the union. And so your point is extremely well taken. And we need to hold, if we're members of the Chamber or NAM or those big organizations, we need to hold them accountable on this for sure. Good question. Thank you.
Does it work? Oh, it's
Sasha?
working. Okay. Well, I'm looking at the stimulus bill, which is becoming more and more unpopular these days. I wonder if you have a plan to link the unions with the stimulus bills, because the union, AFL-CIO, apparently I have inside information. They are spending a lot of time and money in pushing the stimulus bill and pushing in different states to put in some sort of a clause. Like if it's a construction job, you have to give to the union firms first and something like
Yes.
that.
Sasha, that's exactly right, and that's a good point. And that's one of the little nuggets, if you will, inside of the stimulus bill. And when you take the stimulus, the so-called stimulus, I think we call it a government bailout or a bailout bill, and you overlay an executive order that President Barack Obama signed, I think, 2 weeks ago, you understand exactly what Sasha's talking about. President Obama signed an executive order that said all federally funded construction jobs must have what we call project labor agreements. And a project labor agreement says that if you're going to bid or you're going to participate on a project that has federal money, you better be a unionized company. You better have a union contract, and you better be bargaining collectively with the building trades. So basically this $60 billion in so-called shovel-ready construction money, that will be done by union-only construction companies. Now, let me just give you what that means to you as a taxpayer. Only about 16% of America's construction workers are unionized today. About 85%, 84% are non-union and work for companies that don't have union contracts. So we know from statistical analysis and from checking the cost of projects that project labor agreements raise the price of these infrastructure projects probably by about 30%. So that $60 billion in shovel-ready money is already worth 30% less. And I'll let Morton do the math on that because I'm a public school graduate and I don't know how to do that math. But Sasha's exactly right. Why are the unions interested in the stimulus bill? Because it grows government. And what is the final frontier for organized labor? Government. Unless, of course, they can get all the private sector workers to be forced to join the union by card check and other means. But government is the only industry that's growing right now. And that's why the American Council of State, Federal, and Municipal Employees Union, so-called ASME, is so involved in the stimulus bill because the final frontier for them is government. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, probably the final frontier for us is government. So that's why they're interested. That's where the money is, that's where the growth is, and that's where the dues money is. Never forget, follow the money, and this is about compulsory dues. That's what it's about. Good question. Thank you.
Getting back to the Senate, we're in Northern Virginia. Where do our senators stand, and is there any hope to influence them?
Yes, sir, and great question, and I should have been more forward with that. What's going to happen on this card check bill is it has the votes to pass on an up and down vote in the Senate, but there will be a filibuster. And as you know, the filibuster rules require that they get 60 votes. Not that we get 40, not that we get 25, not that we get 15, but they have to get 60 in order to proceed to this bill to bring it up for action on the Senate floor. Mark Warner and Jim Webb are two targets of our program, and they have to be. And we have to let them know that we oppose this bill on compulsory unionism grounds. Mark Warner has tried to fudge and hedge and try to avoid this issue like the plague on the campaign trail because he knew that a lot of his business support that he was very successful in organizing and mobilizing in his campaign would be opposed to this bill. And ordinary Virginians who treasure the freedom that the right to work law provides for them here in the Commonwealth would be opposed to this bill, but yet he needed the union cash and the union money. Well, it turns out he didn't at the end of the day, but it sure was nice when he got it, to win his Senate race. Jim Webb, I think, is a little more difficult than Mark Warner. I think Mark Warner's in play on this bill. Doug Stafford knows more about this than I do, but I think we're targeting both Mark Warner and Jim Webb, and I think they are keys on this vote, particularly Mark Warner, because I think Mark Warner sees himself in a big house painted white sometime in the future. And we ought to make sure that he recognizes that votes like these can affect political future. And you know, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, all this public policy, for the most part, and I'll say virtually. That's a good word from a wise man. Say virtually, and you cover yourself. But virtually every vote that these people cast is about their next election. And so it's our job. It's our job to make it so painful, to make it so hot, and to shine the hot spotlight of public scrutiny on issues like these to convince them that if they cast this vote, their political future is in jeopardy. That's really the only mobilization these people have and they need, and that's why we need to train at the Leadership Institute how to do that. But Warner and Webb are certainly big targets, and we need to be mobilizing against them. Every time Mark Warner shows up, you need to ask him, where are you going to be on this forced unionism card check bill? Where are you going to be on this forced unionism card check bill? And he'll say, well, I believe that we should debate the bill. And what he's saying is, I believe the bill should pass, because if he votes to break the filibuster on the motion to proceed to the bill, this legislation will pass in the United States Senate. So he has to be against the forced unionism card check bill every time, every vote, every place. That's the message to Mark Warner. Yeah.
Hello. I might be the only person in this room that needs to ask this question, but I'm not real sure, other than I know Virginia and North Carolina are right to work. Probably other southern states. I don't know which ones. I don't know if any southern states aren't. I know the Northeast is on the union thing, and Michigan and all that. I don't know about the West, really.
Yeah.
So could you clue us in?
I should, and I'm sorry. Those are basic questions that I sometimes in my energy and speed I forget basic principles. There are 22 right-to-work states in America. Most of the South, from Virginia all the way south, Tennessee, are all right-to-work states. Missouri is not. The Midwest states, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, right-to-work states. North Dakota, South Dakota, all the way down. We actually have a complete line. You can travel from Canada to Mexico in right-to-work states now. You don't ever have to veer off into a compulsory unionism state. North Dakota, South Dakota, Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, basically not Washington, Oregon, California, everything next to them in the Rocky Mountain region except Colorado and New Mexico. And then the Midwest states, the breadbasket of America is right to work. The states you mentioned, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, are not right-to-work states. So we have the Southern Bloc, the Midwest, the Rocky Mountain region is where right-to-work states are. And there is a map on our website. I can direct you there, nrtw.org, www, all those W's, whatever they say, NRTW, and there's a map right there on the website. I apologize about that. That's a great question. The most recent addition to the right-to-work state rolls was Oklahoma in September of 2001. I will tell you, it's not easy to pass right-to-work laws. I had a cost accounting teacher in college that said, in the most pleasant Southern voice, he said, "You may be able to take a man's wife, and you may be able to take a man's dog, but you stick your hand in his pocket to get his money, and you've got his attention." And that's what right-to-work does. It puts their hand in the pocket of the union bosses and takes away their privilege of extracting dues from workers as a condition of getting or keeping a job. So they take this very seriously. In the legislative project management schools, we talk about survival battles. We consider right-to-work passage a survival battle for the unions because they're not selling anything else but compulsion these days, unfortunately. Great question. Thank you. The question is, what size small businesses are exempted out of the card check bill? And the answer is none. Now, I don't know if you can unionize. I guess you could unionize a company with one employee really quite easily. I hadn't thought about that. But I would suggest that there are no limits in the bill as we understand it. Not like the WARN Act or 50 employees or more. There's none of that language in the bill. It's very ambiguous and very unclear at this time. So in our minds, it's everybody. It's everybody. Yeah.
We know one of the biggest targets for unions is Walmart. How would this bill affect Walmart in finally conquering that hill that they want to tackle so much?
Yeah. The question back there was about how does this affect Walmart, and one of the big targets is Walmart stores. Well, basically what this does is allows union organizers to basically intimidate one-on-one or three-on-one workers to sign these cards. And at that point, once they get 50% plus one, that particular unit's organized, and you have a union, and you must bargain with them under the bill. I think what Walmart's afraid of is that they're going to get, one store that they open up in a particular state like Michigan or Indiana or Ohio where there's a bias in favor of unionism. At least there was. There may not be so much anymore. But they're worried that they're just going to be attacked one store at a time, like anybody else should. The idea. Let me say this. Let me back up. Bad management deserves unionism. Bad management gets unionism, and it ought to get unionism. If an employer is mistreating his employees, he should expect to be unionized. If you're taking care of your employees, you probably won't get unionized unless schemes like this are developed where they can talk to these workers at the local gin mill or outside the gate, and they say, look, this is just about getting better health insurance. This is just about getting a little pay raise. Would you like a little pay raise? This is about signing the bill or I'm going to break your friggin' neck. That's what this is about. And sometimes workers who don't want to be intimidated will say, I'll just sign. I'll just sign. And you can't get the card back once you sign it. So I think that's what Walmart's about. And what we do know about those businesses that have this adversarial zero-sum game that is the bargaining process, at least that, it doesn't have to be that way, but American labor unions have used it as a kind of a zero-sum game, that it's management versus labor. And we don't ever use the word labor unless we mean, now, where are my interns here? They must know this. Okay, we don't say labor if we mean union. We don't say union if we mean union boss. We don't say union boss if we mean union thug. We should never concede labor to organized labor. Big difference. Only 7% of the private sector workforce, ladies and gentlemen, is unionized in this country. 93% for whatever reason have said no, and those are our people. They're not their people. So we never concede the word labor. But that's what they're worried about. And then, their pricing model and their whole business model is based on being the low-cost provider. And some of the things that are built into the bargaining system make that virtually impossible. I mean, look at GM. They had 7,000 people that were getting full pay, full benefits that weren't doing any work. That can't help the bottom line, in my mind. Just a personal observation. Yeah.
I've read, I think in the last week, that the administration and the Senate leadership is planning to, on certain initiatives, I think healthcare and energy, avoid the 60 vote filibuster process by putting things in what I think is the budget. I'm not quite sure how the Senate works, but putting in the budget so that they can pass legislation with only getting 50 votes. So, two-part question. How realistic do you think that is for some of the other initiatives, specifically health care and the energy? And do you think there's any repercussions for your legislation?
That's a great question, and it's an opportunity to make a great point. In my limited years in the public policy process, I've seen a lot of battles, and here's what I've learned. The other side will use any tool available to them to succeed. Our side tends not to use the tools available to them to succeed. So the answer to your first part of your question is yes, they will try to use it. And this is an interesting little sidelight, little tangent. Remember when we were all energized about the Republicans overturning the filibuster rules that came to judicial nominees, and we were going to use the nuclear option, and everyone was waving their hands, we must use the nuclear option? Well, there were two groups in America that opposed that on the right. One was the National Right to Work Committee, and one was Gun Owners of America. And we got more press by opposing the Bush administration and by opposing the Republicans on that than we got on anything else for that entire year, because they said, oh, here's a divide between people. Well, the simple idea was there that you don't develop tools that can be used against you in the future. And aren't you glad we have a 60-vote test, at least we think we do, for judicial nominations under this president? Aren't you glad? Paul Weyrich, bless his heart, left us and went to be with his Lord just recently. After all this battle, he was very adamant about the nuclear option, and he had the humility to send a letter over to our office after I think when the Democrats took the Senate, saying, "Thank you for your strong opposition to the nuclear option." Jake Javits said it well, a great defender of Israel. He said, and when asked about the filibuster rules and the ability to get things done to help Israel, he said, "Someday we'll be in the minority." And so we need to be careful how we use those, and I think they'll be careful how they use them, but they will certainly consider it. And I would expect that these things will be wedged into budget bills. They'll be wedged into must-pass appropriation bills. The good news is we'll have, hopefully, if he can still defend us, Bobby Byrd would be opposed to that kind of thing, and that would be helpful. Will they try it? I suspect so. Do we need to be ready for it? Yes, we do. Can we beat them? I think we can. I think we can. Yes, sir.
Hi. If you could go into any of the nuts and bolts of the effort. Some of us have a little time on our hands, and we're being trained in some new methods of political activism. So, I mean, the whole range of things would be of interest to me, whether it's walking up and down the halls of congressional office buildings, or whether it's direct mail or phone calls or walking the streets or whatever. If you could talk a little bit about how...
Thank you. Again, that's a great question, something I should have addressed. I'm going to let you in on a secret, and I think, are we going across the world, perhaps? Okay, well, this is really one of the deep, dark secrets that I hesitate to put internationally and across the world and into the ether. Despite all the maneuvering on new tactics and new techniques, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, who here knows anything about University of Southern California, USC football? Raise your hand. USC football. Are you USC grad? Okay. USC had this model for winning football games for many, many years. It was very exciting. And what they would do is they would get a great running back, and they would get really big offensive linemen. And the quarterback would go into the huddle. This is before they had radios and the coaches were calling the games. You had one guy stand on the sideline and said, "Go get him, men," and the quarterback would call the game. And the quarterback would stand up in the huddle at USC on the first down. He'd say, "Student body right." They'd line up at the huddle, and these big offensive linemen everybody would run to the right, and this running back would follow them, and when they saw a hole, they'd go through it and gain 5 yards. They'd come back to the huddle on second down, and they'd say, "Student body right." They'd line up, he'd snap the ball, the big offensive lineman would run to the right, the running back would run behind him, they'd look for a hole, and they'd gain 5 yards first down. Or maybe they gained 4 yards third down. Quarterback would come in the huddle and say, "Student body right." You get what I'm trying to say. In grassroots mobilization, the things that you know are the things that work. Direct mail, sending the postcards. You know, politicians say they don't have any impact on me at all. Well, here's what you need to remember when you're taking grassroots action. How does it benefit the political elite and the politician if I believe what they say? So if a politician says those postcards make no difference, what do? You stop sending the postcards. Those phone calls don't make any difference. What do? You stop making phone calls. You got to say, bunk. It does have an impact. All of those things you do. Because what we're doing in grassroots mobilization is we're getting you to make an investment in the program. We don't care about those yahoos inside the Beltway. Where are they? Are they over here, or where are they? They're over there. Anyway, we don't care about those guys. What we want is Americans to make an investment. We want them to put a stamp, make a signature, and send the card. We want them to sign a petition. We want them to make a phone call. Because then when we get them to invest in the program, they actually demand accountability in most cases. The politicians can posture all they want and say that doesn't have any impact on me. Ladies and gentlemen, it does. It mobilizes Americans, and that's what this is about. Walking the halls is an excellent idea. But I will tell you, who here has testified in a congressional hearing? Raise your hand if you've testified in a congressional hearing. Okay, right there. And you wrote a great testimony, I'm sure. Great testimony, really good stuff, really convincing. And you sat in that hearing that day, and they pulled out this newspaper, and somebody was reading the sports page while you were testifying. Well, I won't say don't do it. I won't say don't prepare for it. We have to in this system of government, but be prepared to mobilize people. That's where the action is. That's when things get done. And it's direct mail. It's phone calls. It's email. You can generate emails now. Email systems are starting to develop. But it's mobilizing people as opposed to trying to convince the yahoos inside the Beltway. And I use that word pejoratively. They are yahoos in most cases. Thank you. Yes. How much time do we have, Morton? Are we okay? Okay. Last question. Here it comes.
Mark, you talked about Senator Byrd and some others that will fight some of these initiatives, and it is going to take someone up in the Senate, which is where this fight is going to be, to have the intellect to be able to pull all this together. I remember I worked striker replacement back in the 90s, and all the old guys.
This gal's more of an expert than I am. She's a professional right back there. I look to her for guidance. Yeah.
Well, I remember back in the 90s that they'd all the old guys would talk about, oh, Orrin Hatch back in 1977 led this fight. Well, I'm looking around and I'm thinking it's 2009 and who's going to be leading it? And I'm not going to say it's a concern, but is someone going to be helping Orrin Hatch lead this fight? I know Mitch McConnell, Kentucky, where I'm from, is a brilliant master of the Senate, but how do we get other people to stand up and represent the 93% of the people in the private sector who would be opposing this legislation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you remember the striker replacement fight. We had a battle over the tactics, and we had a battle over the strategy, and Orrin Hatch stood up and did that job wonderfully. I think there is new leadership in the Senate that will lead on this issue. I think specifically of Bob Corker from Tennessee. I think of Jim DeMint from South Carolina. I think of Tom Coburn from Oklahoma. I think of believe it or not, even Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. I know that we've lost him on a few other things, but I think as we have a core battle over these core rights, I think you'll see this generation of young leadership in the Senate, which there are some fine leaders there, will stand up and be heard. Now the question is, do they know the rules and do they know the tactics? And I think we're a bit outmaneuvered, although Mitch McConnell is a extremely gifted strategist. I wish he had the requisite commitment to principles that he does in skills of running legislative programs, more so than he does. I think he's done a fine job, but I think he could do better, as they all could. I think there's leadership in the Senate, but that leadership also develops out of the outcry of the public. I mean, I think leadership is you can lead from above or you can be pushed into leadership, and I think if the American people respond the way we think they will and the way they should on this issue, I think leadership will develop on this too, as senators are emboldened. For example, we're doing a nationwide mailing right now to every state in the country, to small business people, and to our membership. And you'd say, well, Mark, why would you send any mail into South Carolina? Lindsey Graham and Jim DeMint are both good on this issue. Well, the reason why we're sending mail to them is because we think it's important they get encouragement from their people to stand up and fight these battles. And Orrin Hatch, being from Utah during those heady days in the 1990s, and then, of course, back in 1978 when he fought labor law reform and led that battle, I mean, getting him encouragement to stand up there and fight is really, really important, because it is, I think, you know, the Senate is, other than the Supreme Court, I guess the smallest private clique in America, and they get a lot of pressure from their colleagues on this. And so our job is to mobilize Americans to both encourage leadership and senators to stand up to fight, but also discourage weak-kneed politicians from voting the right way. But great question. But I think those are some of the names that we're expecting to lead on this issue. Thank you very much for your indulgence. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I can't say for sure whether Leadership Institute training had anything to do with Mark Mix's ability to articulate ideas, but I sure am proud of what a great spokesman and leader he has turned out to be, and you saw an excellent tour de force, and I think you're good on both radio and TV. Thank you for coming, and as a token of appreciation, let me present to you one of the Leadership Institute's Adam Smith neckties.